Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, follow it, share it, talk about it amongst friends. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates on future guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Be sure to check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's in Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by MetroJeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
In nearly 99.99% of all cases, musicians tend to follow a basic formula. First, you write the music. Then you record the music. And once that's done, the music then gets released. That's when you go out and play the music in front of actual people, hopefully in front of people who like the music you've released, or better still, in front of people who have already bought your music or are motivated to buy your music after watching you play it live. The reason this formula exists is that historically speaking, that's what works best. But what if there was another way? What if a band could tour, play their music, perfect each song while playing it on tour, and then make the record, the result of which would produce a better record than the one they would have made had they done it the other way around? One thing is for sure, you'd certainly need to have some incredibly talented, seasoned veteran musicians to pull something like that off. Musicians who have all done it the old way, but have the same sort of improvisational skills and discipline to reject the old formula and do it a different way. Which brings me to the genre-resistant experimental jazz rock supergroup MSSV. This is a band that originally included bass player Mike Watt from the widely respected punk trio, the Minutemen, a guy who also played with fIREHOSE, the Stooges, and literally countless others. The trio also originally included legendary drummer Jim Keltner, whose resume includes sessions with Bob Dylan, John Lennon, George Harrison, the Bee Gees, Randy Newman, Pink Floyd, Neil Young, Brian Wilson, and hundreds more. He was then replaced by Stephen Hodges when Jim Keltner was unable to tour. Stephen Hodges' resume includes playing with Tom Waits, Mavis Staples, Dave Alvin, the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and many others. And then you round out the trio with guitarist Mike Baggetta, who not only grew up in Agawam, Massachusetts, less than 13 miles from my house, he's also the primary songwriter and vocalist for MSSV. His resume includes not only a master's degree in music from Rutgers University, he's also played the Montreux Jazz Festival and has released 9 solo albums of his own. MSSV, which stands for Main Steam Stop Valve, has just released their 6th album called On and On. And it is amazing. And how they recorded it, and how they played it live, and how they continue to play live and tour relentlessly is a story all unto itself. To talk about the new album, the band, and about his own incredible career is my guest today, guitarist Mike Baggetta, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. So a few months ago, I was on Mike Watt's webpage, trying to get him on the podcast because, why not? And that's when I really
page.
Right, Hoot page, right? And that's when I found out about MSSV. And as I'm reading up on it, I realized, well, I don't want to talk to Mike Watt. I want to talk to the guy from Agawam. It's like 12 miles from my house, and that's the guy I got to be talking to.
Yeah, that's true. When I got your email, I was excited to see that you were kind of local to the hometown.
Oh, yeah. I've been here for a good long time. But when did you leave Agawam to go to school?
Well, let's see. I grew up there. I mean, I was born in Springfield, and my parents still live there. So I'm up back and forth for holidays and visits and stuff. But I guess, when I was 18, I went to college. I went to Rutgers down in New Jersey. So whenever that was, I guess like 97, I think.
Oh, wow.
I went to school. Yeah. And then I was down there for 4 years doing music school at Rutgers. And maybe for about a year after that, I kind of didn't really know if I knew I wanted to stay in music and I knew I wanted to do music forever, but it's kind of like, it's kind of a hard life, like not really, if you're really all in, you kind of don't know where your paycheck's coming from sometimes and this and that. So I came up with this plan where I didn't want to just sort of be in music and taking up space if I didn't have to be doing it all the way. So I came up with this plan where I was going to try to like quit playing music. And if I came back to it like in a very sort of natural, organic way that I had deemed for myself, then that meant that I was supposed to do music forever, no matter what happened. But I didn't know of a better way to find that out, except kind of making myself quit. So so I kind of stopped playing. I moved up to East Hampton, Mass, and
Sure.
actually I moved back with my parents for about 6 months in Agawam, and then I moved up to East Hampton, and I was stayed up there for a couple of years, and
Yes, 6 months seems like just about long enough to move back in with your parents.
yeah, well, I mean, it was really helpful because I could save up some money for rent and try to figure out what this plan was, working odd jobs, and I taught a little bit of guitar at the time, like lessons, but I wasn't really trying to pursue being a musician. And then I've just found myself, I started coming back to the instrument more and playing all kinds of things I wanted to. One of the side things from going to music school, I think, is that sometimes one can sort of forget the reasons they got into music because you start, I don't know a good way to put it without sounding disparaging. I had a lot of great opportunities and a lot of great teachers, but sometimes you have a passion and then you do it for your day job, and people get into this thing where it's like, oh man, I don't like doing this thing anymore. It wasn't really like that with music, but it was kind of like that in the sense that it was hard for me to figure out what my music was in that setting. So looking back now, I had to step back for a while and figure it out, and that was the way that I did it. And yeah, and then I moved back to New York City area about 2004.
Yeah.
I was back up in there around 2001, 2004, something like that.
It's funny. I've known a number of people that have gone to for music education at the college level. People have gone to like Berkeley and stuff like that, and a lot of them kind of say the same thing that once they get out of it, they almost have to kind of intentionally unlearn everything they learned. Like they almost were almost overeducated on music because there's something about the education of music and about bringing some heart into it or finding the things that really inspire you that's actually more of a challenge when you have all the knowledge and skill at your fingertips. I mean, did you find it to be that way?
Not exactly. I know what you mean. There's sort of like an argument where like, oh, if you learn too much about music, then it takes the feel out of it. I don't agree with that at all, actually. But there are like these things that can't be taught,
Right.
I think, in not only in music, but like, the arts at large, or really any creative aspect of anything you're doing, the creative side of you know, interpreting law or whatever is probably really, really interesting. But there are things that you can't really teach, I think, when you get into that creative zone. And the things that get taught are the things that are easy for people to teach. They're quantifiable. You can teach music theory a lot, at deep levels, and music history at deep levels because they're quantifiable things. But the thing that people get into music for is sort of that childlike discovery, creative thing. And you can't really fully teach that in a quantifiable way where an institution would be able to grade you on it, I think.
Sure.
And so sometimes it's just easier not to really deal with those between a student and a teacher. But those kind of things do become apparent with mentors and mentorship and stuff when you look back on it in a way that you wouldn't have thought. So, yeah, I don't know. It's complicated.
So, so when you walk away from music after going to school, what was it? I mean, I know you had somewhat of a plan, going into this, but what was it that got you back into it and back into playing again?
Oh, Bob Dylan songs and late period Coltrane.
Really?
Yeah.
So what was it about both of them? I mean, you're talking about two very different kinds of styles of music and genres for that matter, but what was it about those two that sparked your interest?
Yeah, just the way they touched me, that creative thing, like the fact that they are kind of, on the surface they're kind of different when you look at it that way, but deeper down they're not really that different because there's so much passion in the message of that music, like Coltrane's album Sonship in particular is a really big one for me, and the way he's kind of playing and sort of stabbing at this little motivic melodic idea in the title track and then sort of rearranges that whole thing through the course of his improvisation with the band is not any less passionate than the way you have Dylan delivering lyrics to, like, Idiot Wind, or whatever Dylan song you want to take, and they're also both really highly melodic, which touched me at a great level. There's something about the passion in music that really speaks to me, and it was that kind of thing that I wanted to make sure I could find before I sort of dove in for the rest of my life and dealt with all the, you know, sort of side vagaries one has to deal with in life. But knowing that you can have that passion in those kinds of music, and all music, regardless of what type of music it is, was really reassuring to me. It gave me a lot of confidence in what I wanted to do, and that I could do it.
It's interesting to hear you talk about and listening to some of your solo work and some of the other things that you've done, because the way that you play guitar has a very experimental jazz quality to it. It's not standard mainstream type of guitar playing that anyone can pick up playing in a bar in Agawam, for example. But it's like the way you play, I think it's interesting. There's kind of like an avant-garde element to it. Where does that come from you? Are there like particular artists that stand out and say, this is something I'm really motivated or inspired by beyond just like Coltrane and Bob Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like that you put Bob Dylan in the same sentences with avant-garde music. I don't really think about it that way. There's a there's like I said, there's that passion in music, and so whether it's Albert Ayler or David Torn or Bob Dylan or fIREHOSE or Sonic Youth or uh, King Sunny Ade or whatever. There's this thing that's really attractive to me that's unquantifiable. So I think more for me, it's about the fact that it exists in all types of music. And because I like that quality, it leads me to investigate a lot of different things. And that happens just sort of in the course of the day too. Like I get sidetracked thinking like, oh, well, why is this thing happening with my power supply with this electronics thing? And then maybe I'll take a couple hours and figure out how this aspect of electricity works or something. And I I haven't fixed the problem, but I've learned something. Um, I don't really like the idea of limiting myself in my life. Like, oh, I'm only this. A lot of people go like, oh, I'm a jazz guitarist with a capital J, but I just, I would rather think of myself as a musician
Right.
because there's things from all types of music that I can take to make my own music, and that's more interesting to me. Um, I don't know if that really answers your
No,
question,
it,
but
it, it completely does, and it's interesting to hear you mention
I try
David.
to get people away from asking me questions like that.
Nah, listen, I understand,
Because it's
but
a thought process, it's like I want people to think about the fact that like there are these like common qualities between all types of like seemingly different music. And I think if people start to think that way, at least in music or at least in a conversation about music, it helps other people listening think that way about all different aspects of life.
I completely agree. And actually, it's interesting that you bring up David Torn. I heard you talk about him in another interview that I listened to, and I immediately said, well, I'm going to listen to that guy. And I listened to it. I'm like, holy shit, this guy is like. I mean, it's really out there music, but it's so interesting. I mean, it's so many levels of what he's doing. It's like I can see where a guy like you might be, particularly motivated, after hearing, something like that.
Yeah, David's amazing. I mean, he's an incredible film scorer, a composer, guitarist, creative guy. He draws a mean ristretto on the espresso machine too. He's been a really great friend and mentor, and yeah, his music's incredible. I mean, I don't know that it's that out there, depending on context, because again, we get into that thing about what people have been exposed to and what they haven't been. A lot of his stuff is really beautifully melodic, and a lot of his film scores will kind of lead you directly to that, as well as his guitar playing. But actually, there's a funny Agawam tie-in with how I got to hear him and then later work with him and get to know him, which is kind of like lately been like a weirdly sort of thread in my life, but meeting people and stuff. But one year for Christmas, my sister who is not really like, you know, an insider's musician that would know like all the sort of, the rarely talked about great musicians or whatever. I mean, she's great, but that's just not her thing, right? And I remember in high school one year, for I think it was for Christmas or my birthday, she got me a CD. This is 95 or 96 or something. And I opened the CD, and it's an album by this guy, David Torn, and the album's called What Means Solid Traveler. Huge touchstone record for me, top five. And I didn't know anything about it. I had kind of just started getting serious about guitar. My dad plays guitar, so they'd always been around the house, but I just started getting really serious about it. And the cover of the album is super trippy. It's like this sort of like cut up digital artwork, and then on the inside he's got all this sort of like drawing kind of tattoo artwork on his arm, like
Right.
kind of that I forget what they call it. It's sort of like the red ink, sort of
Oh, the
like
henna stuff. Yeah.
yeah. He's got like
Yeah.
this big tattoo looking thing, and he's got a funny looking guitar, and I think there's like a snake, or maybe I'm imagining that he has a snake wrapped around his head. That might not be there, but just the look of it, I was like, whoa, what is this? This is going to be amazing, And I put the record on, and it blew my mind. From not only was it guitar, but there's all these sounds on there that are being manipulated that are kind of from the guitar, but he's using a lot of electronics, and there's this beautiful melodic thing that runs through, and just badass songs. And I wore that CD out. I bought another copy because it was getting torn up in the car and around the house and stuff. Um, but yeah, I have no idea to this day. I don't really know how she found that album to give me, but it changed my life. I have a feeling she went into like, the Strawberries or whatever was around at that time and asked the guy working, like, give me the weirdest guitar record you got. And somehow he knew about this one. But yeah, that was a big, big deal for me. And it kind of gave me a lot of confidence that, oh yeah, for someone to find their own version of music that's so personal and to make a statement and put it out in the world is like a really important thing. And that's one of the big albums that taught me that.
And also to do something that's so creatively beyond any specific genre, I think is really admirable artistically. I mean, because like you said before, you're not really beholden to one kind of music. It's just music. And it's like when I hear Mike Watt, I kind of feel that way too. Like I
Oh
think
yeah,
people tried to pigeonhole him, when he was a kid, like the Minutemen being a hardcore band. When I hear the Minutemen, it's anything but a hardcore band. To me, that's a jazz
hardcore.
that's a jazz trio, and it always was. And Watt is such a great musician that to me, he's one of those guys that always tries to defy any genre that might roadblock him in some way.
Well, I think it's a similar thing that we've been talking about where you just sort of get into music and
Yeah.
you're not thinking about, oh, I only listen to this, I only listen to that. I mean, he's told me so many stories about his friend Raymond taking him to hear jazz musicians, uh, like around Watts and South Central and stuff when he was a teenager and getting exposed to all these things. He tells a great story where the first time he heard Coltrane, he thought he was a punk musician, because it's kind of late Coltrane and it's sort of free blowing and stuff. And I think he probably just maybe he heard the Germs and then he heard late Coltrane. And I think if you don't know about these sort of genre delineations that, the system tries to foist on you, if it's just a friend playing you records, I could totally see how that could be really similar
Yeah.
sounding. And it's about that sort of shared energy thing, that shared passion thing that you can get from a band like the Germs or an improviser like John Coltrane. I totally see that. And if you're trying to make your own music with your friends or whoever, yeah, you just kind of come up with ways to do it that are interesting to you because everybody's different. Music is like a celebration of life. It's a celebration of independence. And, uh, you know, I think people should be doing their own thing, not trying to fit into a neat little category.
So how do you get Mike Watt in your life? How did you wind up meeting him?
How did I get him in my life? Well, he was kind enough to make some music with me. First of all, I have another friend named Chris Schlarb who runs a studio in Long Beach called Big Eagle Music, and he was starting a record label along with his studio. and he asked me if I wanted to make a record for him. And I did want to do that because I wanted to work with a friend. I had already put out 4 records on a label from Barcelona called Fresh Sound New Talent, which is this guy Jordi Pujol runs that, who's a great fan of music and a great, amazing guy to have given me the opportunity to make 4 albums of my music when I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, that's a pretty big step right there. But I did want to try some things that I thought might not fit with his vision of the label. And so when Chris asked me if I wanted to make a record for him, I said, "Oh yeah, well maybe I could try this sort of direction I wanted to try with some new music that I had in my mind." And so I said, "Sure, I'd love to do it, but I want to try something I've never done before." And this kind of ties into David Torn a little bit too. I told Chris I wanted to make a record with people I'd never met.
Hmm.
Because I'd always sort of thought that when you had a band, it was with your friends, which a lot of times is the case, but I had always assumed that every great record or every great band, it was great because they'd known each other since they were kids or something, you know. Totally naive. I mean, I thought this like well into my 30s, you know, it was pretty naive. And I've heard some records that were like people put together for big names and this and that, or to make a record that would look like it's going to be a good record. And more often than not, those records don't sound like great records. So in my mind, I thought, well, if you want to make a great record, you got to know people for decades, you know. Um, but I was talking to David Torn. He mastered my last Fresh Sound record called Spectre. And when I was at his house hanging out with him for the mastering, he told me a story about his first record for ECM called Cloud About Mercury, which is an amazing band with Tony Levin,
Hmm.
Mark Isham, and Bill Bruford. And I just thought they'd known each other for years. And we were talking about it. He goes, "Oh no, I didn't know any of them. I just cold called everybody." You know, he like wrote Bill Bruford a record and mailed it up, wrote him a letter and mailed it off to England. And he called him back and said he'd be into trying it. And Mick Karn was supposed to play bass on that record, but he was unavailable. So he got Tony. And,
Oh,
and I
oh,
was like, wait a minute,
oh,
yeah, that's a
oh,
great,
oh, darn.
yeah, I
Had to
know. Yeah.
settle for Tony Levin.
What a shame. Yeah. Um, and so I was like floored. I was like, oh, you hadn't met it. Not only were you not friends for 30 years with these guys, you'd never met them. And he said, no, it was like totally cold called. And so then in my mind, I thought, okay, so one can make a great record without knowing the people you're about to play with. That's interesting to me. So I wanted to try that. So back to Chris Schlarb and Big Ego, he says, yeah, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to make a trio record with Mike Watt and Jim Keltner. And we laughed and laughed, you know, like thinking like that'll never happen or whatever. But in my mind, there's this thing about the way those two guys play, which is sort of like 110% commitment to the music that you're making in the moment, and that you can kind of evolve what you play without getting away from the core idea of the song that you're making. That's like in a nutshell, in my mind and in my ear, a quality that those two guys shared. And I thought it was crazy that they'd never played together or recorded together that I knew of, which was the case. So, anyways, I kept kind of harping on this and going back to it with Chris, and we kept talking about it and we laughed about it less. And then we actually found out a way to do it. Chris figured out a day that we could all get there. He called Jim and set it up, and he had friends in the area that knew him, and he'd worked with Watt before. And so there was like one day in, I forget if it was May or June or whatever, I think it was 2017, that we could be in the studio. So I had a bunch of music and stuff, and wow, it's going to happen. So we go out there and we all meet that day. Jim had never met Mike. I'd never met Jim. I'd never met Mike, all this stuff. And we made this record called Wall of Flowers in one day. And it was not the record I thought I was going to make, but it ended up being a lot better because I trusted those two guys to take care of the music in the moment. And that was another big lesson I learned that day.
When you say you made the record in one day, was that like the first day, or which had you been playing for at least a couple of days before you said, let's
No,
try?
that was the first day. We only had the one day, but that's not such a
Wow.
weird thing when you come sort of like from the, you know, the quote unquote jazz world. You kind of don't have a budget and you kind of don't have a lot of time, and you work with people that are sensitive to music, and you trust them to be able to do what needs to get done to at least have like the basic structure. I went back and I overdubbed with a bunch of guitars and tarted it up with guitar stuff a little bit here and there. But yeah, a lot of people are sort of like, whoa, it was only one day. But I know a lot of people that have made great records in one day. So it does happen.
But it does show you that, you know, when it comes to like collaborating with people, if you have the right combination of people, it elevates everybody at every level. And it sounds like in order for the three of you to have done that, that's exactly what happened between, you know, you, Mike, and Kellner. I mean, for people that are not doing that, that does sound almost impossible. But I mean, you are right. I mean, you know, jazz musicians do it all the time.
It would have been really easy to mess it up, you know,
Yeah.
if because I had a stack of music. I had like 15 songs or something, and nobody ever seen these, and I brought them in, and I thought that's what we were going to do. We did two of them, and then there were things that were like gonna take too long, and I knew we only had one day. So at one point, I think I asked Chris or asked those guys, I was like, "Hey, what if we just improvise for like 3 hours instead and see what happens?" And both of those guys were into it. Both of those guys were psyched to be there for whatever reason. I think it was different enough and interesting enough that some guy they didn't know from the East Coast came out there and wanted to make some weirdo music. You know, I don't think Jim gets to improvise or play the way that I wanted to see if we could do often. So it was interesting to him. You know, and we did that and we kind of came up with a bunch of little atmospheres that we improvised. And a few of those I went back later and I sort of edited them down and recomposed around them and added bits and pieces here and there from what they were playing to turn them into like compositions. Um, and then me and Jim did a duet on the old song Blue Velvet. And then I did a solo version. And then we did two songs that I wrote. And yeah, it was just a really nice day. It was a nice record. We ended up making a second record a year, 2 or 3 years after that too. So yeah, it's a really interesting band. We've only been together for 2 days. The first day was making the first record, and the second day was making the second record. But I learned a lot.
Now, my understanding is that at some point you thought, wouldn't it be great to go on the road with this? And you and Watt were both, you know, down for it, but Jim Kellner, for whatever reason, couldn't. And then all of a sudden, Stephen Hodges comes to the picture. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I thought we'd do a couple of gigs around the country, but Jim kind of wasn't traveling at that point, which is totally understandable. The road is not really a gratifying situation all the time. But Mike still wanted to do something, and I still wanted to do it. And and so another big touchstone record in my top five is Watt's first opera, Contemplating the Engine Room, which is Mike Watt's sort of song cycle about his friend D. Boone, and there's some stuff in there about George from Minutemen and George Hurley, and there's elements about his dad and elements about this book called The Sand Pebbles, and my buddy Nels Klein plays on it, and the drummer on that record is Stephen Hodges. So in my mind, I thought like, oh, maybe it'd be really interesting. Again, keeping with the theme of trying to make music with people I'd never met, maybe it'd be interesting if Hodge wanted to do it. So Watt gave me his number. I gave him a call. He was playing with Mavis Staples at the time, and he was in Chattanooga doing a festival, and I was living in Knoxville at the time. And so I drove down there to meet him, and you know, he just wanted to make sure I wasn't like an axe murderer or something. And spoiler, I'm not.
You're not. Okay, that was gonna be my next question, just to be sure.
And so the idea was that I had I wanted to do like 10 shows coast to coast, 10 shows in 10 days, and just sort of play some of the music from this record and get the word out that the record's there. Because I don't have a publicist and all this kind of stuff, at least not at the time. And Hodge was down to try it. I think he was interested to kind of see what would happen if he got to play with Watt again, 30 years after the Engine Room record or something like that. And yeah, it just seemed kind of like an interesting thing. So we did about a week. No, we didn't do a week of rehearsals. We only did 3 or 4 days of practice, I think. And then we did these shows. And about halfway through, I thought, when you change one person in a project, kind of obviously, it changes the whole sound and the whole feel and the whole way a project works musically and personally and all this stuff. So I thought instead of kind of rehashing music that we made with a different drummer, and then also doing a couple of songs from Engine Room, with me playing the Nels guitar parts in my own way, I thought like, man, this band deserves its own music. And so I asked them, what do you think about, doing a couple more shows at the end of the year, but I'll have music that I just write for the three of us, and then we'll make a record and see what happens. And they were all down to do that. And Watt came up with the band name, Main Steam Stop Valve, which comes from the movie version of the Sand Pebbles book. So there is like a tie-in with the Engine Room record. And then I wrote a bunch of music. And then later in 2019, we did 5 or 6 shows in California and made the first MSSV record.
Now, like you say, when you're introducing new people into a situation, it does feel different. Did you understand it right away that this is going to be completely different than what you had with Keltner? Not that Hodges or Keltner, one's better than the other. That's not really the issue. The issue is it's a different personality. He's bringing different ideas to the table, and this is a totally collaborative situation. Even if you are the primary songwriter, did you notice right away how different it was from the first incarnation?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. If someone plays different, it makes everyone else play different. And
Yeah.
like you said, that way it's really collaborative. Yeah, I write all the songs and this and that, but I want people to have their personality in the music. I don't want drum machine, synth bass, whatever, right? I want people to play the music the way that they play, and that ends up being the way that I write the music for the people that are going to play the music. So yeah, it was pretty apparent, but it was just a feel thing.
The new album, On and On, I think it's really, really cool. I mean, I think it's not only a great record musically, but the way you guys go about recording music seems to kind of perplex a lot of people. Like you say, you're there for one day with Keltner and Watt, and you come up with a record. There's kind of, it almost seems kind of like a backwards way of doing it, but it's really not in some ways. Also, the idea is you're the primary songwriter, but each of these songs goes through this process where you flesh them out on the road during like a fairly intense touring schedule, and then you record it after the song has kind of been worked out and has developed because of playing in front of people rather than the other way around. It sounds more like an extension of what you were talking about with Keltner and Watt. It's just like, if you're in a band and you're writing your first album, well, that's how you do it. It almost is like every album you do is like your first album all over again. I don't know if you see it that way, but the more I thought about it, it's like, well, they don't do a second album. It's the first album in a whole different way.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it like that, but that's kind of a nice thing to think about because, when you make your first record, you don't know what you're doing, and it's kind of a big adventure. So I like the feeling of that. Like how do you do that every time without, getting used to the process and getting sort of jaded about it or whatever. Yeah, no, well, the other thing too is that, going back to my earlier days, I'd be in people's bands once in a while and they'd write all this music and we'd practice the music and then we'd make the record. And then the record would come out like a year later. And then there'd, maybe you could go on the road for a week or two and you'd have to relearn all the music. And then you'd play it every night or almost every night. And I would think at the end of these trips, like I would think to myself, like, man, the music sounds so much better right now after the last gig than it did when we recorded it. We should have made the record now, like what a missed opportunity. But yeah, there's this thing of like, well, you can't really go on tour if you don't have a new record out or something like that. People think it didn't used to be that way, but that's kind of how people think about it now. But yeah, I kind of told myself if I'm ever going to have the chance to record my own music, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to play it a bunch first, let
Yeah.
it breathe, let it change, let it turn into like these interesting things that I couldn't have thought of by myself because it's now you're bringing other people into the mix and the way they think about stuff changes it and for the better or just different or more interesting and you can learn ideas from these people and stuff. So yeah, just in my mind, like, man, that's what you want to capture. Like the record is forever. The gig is like one night, maybe somebody records it or people have a memory of the experience, which is great. But the record is like people can go to that forever and listen to it and say, like, damn, what a terrible record, or whoa, what an amazing record.
I was going to mention something like that because, you're given the opportunity for songs to evolve rather than to commit it to a permanent form. Because, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are singing, Jumpin' Jack Flash for the last 60 years, the same exact way they recorded it. If you're 70, 80 years old, it doesn't mean the same anymore. You can't
Yeah, and
really.
I bet it feels really different to do it. And I bet there's things like these nuanced things that change every night or over the decades or something with that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. So when you present songs to the other guys, and obviously you can't in this in this structure, for lack of a better term, you can't be too precious as a songwriter and say, well, this song has got to be this one way. You're clearly going into this with the potential that the song you wrote will have nothing to do with the song it becomes. That has to be a kind of exciting way to do it, because you just don't know what it's going to become in a week or a day or however long it may be.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely trust that the end result is going to be better than what I start with. Because if you don't start with that, then you're going to get into like control freak mode, and then you're going to you're guaranteed to make it worse than it would have been, especially when you're dealing with musicians who are like great, amazing musicians who you want to play with, who what their ability is, and that they can make great things happen. You want to entrust them with the process, and you want them to own the process, to take the the framework or the song or whatever I bring in and say, here's kind of these elements, but let's talk, let's figure out on the road what works better for everybody, or what works better for the song, or what is better for the way that you're playing now these days, that your style can initiate a change in this music. That's what the music is for. It's kind of almost writing music so that the band has a chance to evolve around something. Whereas if you play old music, you can change that too. And we definitely do that on the road for sure. To the point where like now we'll play songs from On and On, because we also did new music. We have a fourth record that'll come out next year. So of course we did all that music on this tour, about 69 shows. And but now we played some of the On and On music every night. And at the end of this tour, I'm kind of like, oh man, we should have recorded those On and On songs again. Some of them are so different than the record, but you got to stop at some point or you're never going to make any records,
Right.
But yeah, I think it's just about trusting the people you're working with. And if you're not able to trust them to do something better than what you come in with, it's just not going to work in that way. And then you get something different. You get something that you're fully responsible for, and it doesn't matter who's playing it. You can go down that road for sure.
I want to ask you a little bit about the touring, because the schedule that you guys have put together. You said 60 some odd dates. I mean, you just came back from Europe, I believe.
Yeah, we just got back. We did 52 shows in 52 days in the US. We had about 3 weeks off, and then we did 17 shows in 17 days in the UK and Ireland.
I mean, touring is not necessarily a young man's game. And I know if you said to me, hey, we're going to go on a trip for 59 days for 59 cities, I would have told you exactly where else you should go. But but for the average musician, that's a really intense schedule to keep. And I know that you guys are operating kind of on a different mindset with this, but that's a lot for three guys to deal with.
Well, I hear that a lot from people, but it's not like we're on the side of the road digging ditches for 9 hours in the sun, like we just get to play our music for 75 minutes every night.
But then you got to get in a van and then drive the next city and unload, reload, put everything together and take it down.
Well, actually, after the gig, we stay in the town. We don't do any driving at night, but we do most of the driving in the morning or the next day. The US tour, Watt does all the driving because he lets us use his boat for the tour. And the UK tour, I did all the driving because I had to rent that one over there. And we got to take a ferry a couple of times and stuff. It was fun. But I mean, you have to want to do it, like it's not a drag to get to play my music every night. It's like one of the greatest experiences of my life to get to play my music with these guys for a bunch of people in all these places I've never been every night. That's awesome. That's like what I dreamed about, and like what I still dream about doing all the time. I'm so lucky to be able to do it. So yeah, yeah, of course you can have an attitude like, oh man, this is so tiring and this is so difficult. But like, I don't know. It seems like kind of a stupid way to think about it. If you want to do it, yeah. If you don't want to do it, yeah. But that kind of goes back to my thing before about when I tried to stop playing music. Like, I didn't want to be that person where I was like getting to do this and thinking like, oh, this is such a drag. I'm so tired. Like, that's lame. And I didn't want to be lame, So I wanted to know that I was in this 100%, and I am. And I'm fortunate for everything. I had thyroid cancer in 2006, and I had to get my whole thyroid taken out. And like I was 26 or something, or 27. And it was like really terrifying. Like, oh, I have cancer. What does this mean for the future of my life? Am I going to die? All that, that was another big thing that like I've been thinking about on and off lately more than I used to. I don't know why. I'm fine. Everything worked out great. I'm fine. There's nothing to be concerned about. But that's another thing in my life where like, wow, I feel like I had this whole opportunity given to me all over again. And I try not to lose sight of that too, about like how lucky people are every day. And don't get me wrong, I complain all the time about all kinds of dumb stupid. Ask my wife. I mean, it can be as petty as they come,
Of course.
but like big deal stuff. I mean, yeah, we just did 69 shows on the road, and those guys are older than me, less young than me, like Watt would say. But it's really inspiring to see them bring it every day too. They get up and they're in it with me, and they get in the van, and people are just there to play, and they get to play, and we work on the music every day, and the music changes, and we have some fun along the way. It's great.
I don't know if this helps you. I would think that it would be, because the way you have this all hammered out, it's almost like you've done what you could to prevent like a monotony bound type of situation where you're playing the same songs the same way every day, city to city. Here you're playing the same songs, but there's lots of room for movement. In fact, it's even encouraged.
Yeah.
Like that's the one thing you don't have to worry about, is it becoming stale and boring, because every night's going to be something totally different.
Yeah, that's true. It is this, and when we do a tour, generally speaking, it is the same songs every night, because most of those songs we're going to record at the end of the tour for the new album. So it's like, yeah, we practice. It's kind of like having practice in front of people every night. And then after the gig, we get in the boat and we go back to where we're sleeping. And we talk about the gig, what worked, what didn't work, why didn't this work? Let's try this tomorrow. And the next day is sound check. If we have time, we go over some of the stuff we want to maybe change about some of the songs. So yeah, and then I do like make sure there's space in the music for whether it's sort of improvised sections or maybe a guitar solo here and there, because it is my band. I'm going to do that. Or maybe the words change, or maybe there's a way that, Watt's going to play the bass part differently because of what's going on with the kick drum. And, there's like all these, there's all this stuff. And there's a lot of people on the tours they'll come to because usually the US, we start in SoCal and we end in SoCal. Actually, we start in Pedro and end in LA, the last number of tours. But people will come to the first gig and they'll come to the last gig. And some people did this in the UK. They came to the first gig in Brighton and they came to the last gig in England. And every time people go like, wow, it's so different. It's so different. First gig was great, but man, it's like so different now, because these things change. So it's still exciting to kind of hear the set, even though it's, ostensibly the same songs.
So with On and On out now, and you've got a whole bunch of new songs that you're ready to go, when do you think the next record will be out? This year or next year?
It'll probably come out sometime next year. Yeah.
Awesome.
Usually seems to be about 18 months or so, if history is any indication. But yeah, On and On is out now on Big Ego. And you can get it on you can find it on our Bandcamp site, but this album's interesting because the download and the version you hear on the streaming services is the songs. But if you buy the vinyl version, you get a different version because there's all this sort of improvised music that we did in the studio that kind of is interspersed between the pieces, and it's elements of songs that you are about to hear later on the record or some things you've already heard in different orders. So there's all this foreshadowing music in between the songs and the way the sides work.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, which actually is a thing from Contemplating the Engine Room, and other albums have done that kind of sort of orchestrational way of putting it together. So it's not really like my Sgt. Pepper's, but
it's good enough. It's good enough. Mike, this has been great. Really interesting to talk to you, and it's great to talk to a guy from just down the road.
Yeah, West Mass.
That's it.
West Mass. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Have a great night.
Okay, you
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
The name of the new album from MSSV is called On and On, and as you heard, new stuff is on the way next year. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. You can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support, but most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.